Hello, and welcome to our webcast today, Rethinking Cybersecurity, from Financial Burden to Business Catalyst. My name is Sarah Frazier, and I'll be our host today. Joining me is a very special guest, Chris Steffen, the Vice President of Research at EMA. If you're not familiar with Chris, he has over 25 years of industry experience as a noted information security executive, technical evangelist, and presenter. He focuses on IT management and leadership, cloud security, and regulatory compliance. He is currently the Vice President of Research for Information Security, Risk, and Compliance Management for Enterprise Management Associates, a leading industry analyst and consulting firm that provides deep insight across the full spectrum of IT and data management technologies. Chris also serves as the co-chair of the Zero Trust Working Group for the Cloud Security Alliance, the world's leading organization dedicated to securing cloud computing environments. Chris has presented at numerous industry conferences and has been interviewed by multiple online and print media sources. He holds over a dozen technical certifications, including CISSP and CISA. Chris, I'm delighted to have you on the show today. Welcome.
Yeah, that's a lot of bio there, man. It's amazing that that's all me, right? But yeah, thank you for having me, Sarah. It is a pleasure to be here talking with you. Obviously, we've talked plenty of times before, and look really forward to talking about this. It was great to be able to participate with CyberGRX and Process Unity to generate this report, and it obviously a little interesting how it came about to begin with, and like I said, I think the findings were great, and it'll be a great discussion to be having.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember when you and I sat down a couple months ago having a beer, and we were chatting about the state of cybersecurity, how it's evolved and changed with the overnight pivot to remote work from the pandemic, the Ukraine war, the global impact, and just the sheer volume of cyber attacks that we're seeing today. And from that study, we asked you to, or from that conversation, we asked you to do a study on behalf of CyberGRX and Process Unity to dive into how are organizations approaching their cybersecurity programs today. Are they focused on compliance given all the new regulations that are cropping up? Are they security focused, primarily concerned with implementing defensive measures, or has it shifted to a proactive risk-based approach? And I know you spent months just surveying IT and security teams, talking to industry thought leaders, and you walked away with some great insights on how our industry is evolving and how organizations are approaching cybersecurity differently. So let me start off by asking you, from your research, how has the perception of cybersecurity shifted from being viewed as a protective mechanism or a means to ensure that you're in compliance with industry regulations to a more strategic business initiative? How are you seeing this unfold in organizations today?
Yeah, it's a great question, and one that we could spend 6.5 hours talking about alone. The reality of it is that I think you're finally starting to see real alignment. And when I say that, I mean that finally the CISO, the head of security, whatever you want to call that person, is finally starting to have a real seat at the business table. What that really means, though, is how do you take and align security with business processes and do it in a way where you're still accomplishing your overall security goals? There's a gazillion different ways, but the way that I really see, and the way that, again, you and I have talked about, is you're really starting to see this third-party risk management approach. A lot of times it was just this reactive, throw something up there, hope that it solves the problem, and move on. Sometimes you had a more like a compliance-based approach, and hoping that if you address all these controls that, again, some organization or some regulatory body throws at you, that you're going to be quote unquote secure, which, by the way, never works, just so we're all clear about that. But I think that we're getting past that. I think that we're finally starting to see a risk-based approach. Understanding the third-party risk management is really kind of the future, and it provides that alignment into the organization in a way that a kind of one-off solutions-based, project-based doesn't do, and it gives you a broader picture on how security can be a real enabler in the business and not just a cost center.
Yeah, that's so key. As you talk about this shift from being reactive in nature and moving away from that legacy reactive approach, relying on vendor questionnaires or even evaluating a vendor after an incident occurs, what do you believe are the biggest hurdles that are preventing businesses from adopting a more proactive risk-based approach?
So again, it's always the, trying to, take and save the horses after they've already escaped the barn, and so on and so forth. And it's the idea that you want to have proactive instead of reactive security, right? So
Mhm.
so many organizations, and quite bluntly still do, look at security as a cost, as something
Mhm.
that they don't have a choice. They are forced to take and do it. And when you're forced to do something, almost it's human nature to almost do the minimum. Whatever that minimum is. I am told to do 10 things. I am going to do exactly those 10 things. I am not going to do 11, but because by God, that would go against everything I believe in as a human. Therefore, I'm going to do that 10 and that's it, right?
Mhm.
That's the problem with taking and doing it, strictly based on a set of controls. I mean, not to pick on PCI DSS or HIPAA or anything else, but if you are taking and basing your security program just to generate the whatever you need to the evidence or the security program to meet those specific requirements, you have baseline security. You do not have mature security. You don't have a methodology that is integrated into your overall operations. You don't have buy-in from all your organizational leadership. And so you're basically doing security for security's sake. So it compounds the fact that then it is just a cost center. It is one of those things where it's very hard to demonstrate the value on something that you're doing just because you have to. When you go to a risk-based approach and have it integrated into your organization, not only do you address all those other requirements, but then you actually bring value to the organization. Through that, through compliance, through less incidents. It could be through reduced headcount. It could be through reduced costs. And it certainly is going to be through better business integration. Once you do those things, then it's also iterative that the organizations that your silos within your organizations want to work with your security team to take and do more stuff to make things more integrated, to gain some of those gains that you would get by having that integrated approach. And
Mhm.
so it is a mindset, it is a culture, it is something that a lot of organizations need to achieve that certain amount of maturity to be able to get there. But once they do, the benefits almost speak for themselves. And so you're seeing that happen more and more. When we have the CISO at the table, and I know that we'll talk about it obviously a little bit more as we go on today, but when you see the CISO as a member of that organization's decision making, now all of a sudden there is a legitimate champion there that can really fight for not only for the organization and the values that security brings to the organization as a whole, but then allows the organization to champion the causes that security believes is important and are important just in general. I mean, nobody wants to find out that they've been hacked on the 9 o'clock news, right?
Mhm.
What's
Mhm.
the worst nightmare? The worst nightmare in the world is your CEO getting a call from one of your vendors saying, by the way, did you know that you're being hacked right now? Right? I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, I've been a CIO. Let me tell you, that's about as bad as it gets, right? You don't want to ever hear that conversation. You want a methodology that you're at least going to know that you have a problem and are dealing with the problem before you're getting a call from the CEO saying, guess what? We have a problem.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And you touched on something that I think is perhaps a pain point for a lot of CISOs, and that is the proverbial seat at the table. So in your conversations and from your research, are you finding that CISOs are now getting that seat at the table, and how are they breaking down the silos that naturally can occur in an organization, to break through with the stakeholders? How are you seeing that playing out?
Yeah, I mean, even in the research, we found that about almost 90%, like 88% of the organizations had a CISO already.
Hmm.
And but that role is changing, right? And so
Right.
if there was one thing, and I say this, feel free to strike lightning at me, but if there was one benefit in quotes of the pandemic, is that organizations really had to understand how some of the immediate changes that they were going to have within their organization were going to be impacted by security. How was it going to impact their vendor relationships? How were their people remotely going to be able to get in and do the things that they needed to do what they're going to do? And so the pandemic brought a lot of those problems, challenges into focus. And so the CISO was there saying, great, I know how we can solve some of those problems. Here's what we're going to do. Things are going to be better. Life will go on, so on and so forth. That's great. Then earlier this year, the SEC came out and basically said, you organizations that are publicly traded need to have somebody on your board of directors that is responsible for security. It needs to be somebody that is accountable, because when you have a security incident, we need to understand basically what throat to choke, right? We want to understand, when it's all said and done, who is going to be accountable to your shareholders when there is a breach. We all know, and there's been some very public ones recently, like with MGM, some of the other stuff that's going on right now, plus all the stuff, all the conflicts that are going on across the world in Ukraine and Israel, so on and so forth. There's plenty of stuff, technical term being stuff, going on in the world right now that involves the CISO, which involves some kind of cyber defense, cybersecurity, and needs to be paid attention to. How it relates to your organization, it varies, and it'll vary day to day, month to month, year to year. But the great news is that the CISO can be there to give that kind of education to your company leadership and your board of directors to understand how that is going to impact them, how it integrates with your overall business plan, and what you're going to be able to do about it. Before then, that role was the CISO was that guy that you slid pizza to under the door, once a week, make certain that he was fed. He handled the guys with the tinfoil hats, and that was his role. Now that role is becoming an integrated business leadership role, and the security people are finally getting a real seat at the table. So when you talk about the changes overall, those are the changes that I'm immediately seeing. They're still developing, right? And so, this SEC filing goes into effect in December. You're already starting to see some of the impacts of it. There's a gazillion different CISO roles out there on, LinkedIn and Indeed and whatever else, because people understand that they need to be able to play in this patch. But I find it great. I find it one of those things where the CISO finally does have that business role, take that business skill, integrate with the business, make certain that your compliance and your security processes are integrated as part of your business operations, and you're going to be the better for it.
Yeah, certainly. I definitely see how the CISO is becoming a more strategic advisor, how communication skills are becoming more critical, and really being able to explain your risk posture in a way that matters to the stakeholder that you're talking to. So I
That's
think
right.
those are great comments. I want to shift, though, to something else that you said about how cybersecurity has traditionally been a cost center. And to shift that mentality, it does involve an investment, to move to that risk-based approach. It involves an investment in people, in technology, in time and effort. And I know that you've conducted interviews with many CISOs and from some very prominent brands as part of this study. How can you share how they are quantifying their risk management programs and how they are demonstrating ROI in their organizations?
Yeah, a great question. And so let's step back for a second. There's two ways, and I'm oversimplifying this, but work with me here.
Yeah.
There's two ways to look at how a business takes and spends: something that makes money or something that costs money, right? And so traditionally, you would argue that security was something in the organization that costs money. The really interesting thing, and with some of the CISOs that I interviewed as part of this research, they are shifting that whole mindset. They are looking at, when you can take and use security as a differentiator in your industry, a security program that is mature enough that it is literally a differentiator between you and your nearest competitor, because your competitors may or may not have a security program that is mature as yours. Then all of a sudden, security is no longer a cost center, it is a cost enabler. And so if I come to you, Sarah, and say, look, I can take and show you, if we do this, let's say a zero trust program, We accomplish a very good zero trust program. We have a really strong zero trust infrastructure. We take and promote that with our customers, and our customers that are looking to do government work are going to be really particularly interested in that project because they have the same zero trust mandate. Now, all of a sudden, I can demonstrate to you that our zero trust program is bringing benefit to our organization that our competitors won't necessarily be able to bring to us. And does that mean increased sales? Does that mean increased visibility? It probably means both of those things. But that's a very simple example of where you could take in and have a strong, mature security program based on the needs and the priorities of the company that is a differentiator compared to what maybe one of your competitors is doing. And we've known this for a long time. When it comes to compliance, people have used compliance as a differentiator. Now it's almost what you call table stakes, where the organization, you got to have compliance, right?
Right.
But, for example, it would be hard, and I'm not trying to pick on anybody in particular, but our friends in Las Vegas just had a huge breach. And the idea that you're going to use their security program as a spotlight is concerning, right? And so I'm not going to say that's going to stop me from going to their casinos, because Lord knows that I go plenty. But at the same time, it is something to keep in mind. It is something that, when I am doing my risk management on the vendors that I choose to deal with, do I want to have extra controls in place now that I know that that organization has had this kind of exposure and this kind of breach? And the answer might be yes. And so if you can bring that kind of value to the business table as to, how you negotiate those contracts, how you deal with those organizations, now all of a sudden you've inserted the security team in a way that was never possible before, but has the attention of all your business leadership as a differentiator and a return to value on what they're already investing in the security space.
That's good. That's good. As we talk about business enablement too, I think about how the adoption of third parties and how it's really accelerated for organizations to the point that it's overwhelming security teams, right, in the time that it takes to thoroughly vet and onboard a vendor.
It does.
And so as I think about other conversations that we've had with CISOs, and how if they take too long in that vendor vetting and investigation time, they lose the opportunity to speak into the decision, and the organization moves on. Assessments take 3 weeks
or
however long.
Yep.
You mentioned a little bit about automation, so I want to touch on TPRM automation. How do you see automation and AI shaping the future of cybersecurity, especially when we're talking about vetting and onboarding vendors?
Yeah, that again, not a 2-minute conversation, right? So to start with, the interesting thing that you brought up there, and it's worth mentioning again, is that when you start taking and talking about security assessments in general, if you set your Wayback Days, and Wayback Days only being even pre-pandemic, you would get a questionnaire, you fill out your questionnaire, and a lot of times from a vendor due diligence perspective, you might be done for a year, which just boggles my mind, but it is what it is, and I'm going to move on from there. Lord knows every single one of our environments, and I mean every single one of our environments, every single day changes. There is no such thing as a static environment. So the idea that your vendor due diligence is always going to be a point in time is particularly concerning. Where AI comes into that, when it's all said and done, is having methodologies to automatically make some assessments and understand the risk, and what does that risk mean, and should I be querying them more often, and do I need to do something more on site, and gaining that knowledge to do a little bit of the investigation and a little bit of the vetting and understanding, so that then my limited resources can say, well, those guys are likely good, they have a track record of being good, I'm going to use automation to determine the ones that are the higher risk, the ones that I should be paying more attention to. I'm going to concentrate on some of those things, not to pick on them, but then if they've proven themselves, they get a different risk score. We can use automation to determine a better risk score. And when I say better, I mean something that is more in line with what my company's risk profile is going forward. I don't want to take some out of the box, that isn't specialized or specifically created for me. I want to take and have an understanding of what that risk score is going to look like for my organization based on my risk. From there, then I can determine and use other automation to vet what's going on with that organization. Maybe not even from sources that they give me. Maybe I'm trolling the internet. Maybe I'm looking at gray sites and black sites through another third party that are saying, wow, well, they had a breach here and their information is exposed and blah, blah, blah. I mean, those are all factors that can come into it, right? You want to be able to understand the whole gamut of factors, consolidate them in a way that isn't really person intensive. That's what you use the AI for. That's what you use the automation for. And then come up with a process to understand what you need to do next. Is it a yearly review? Is it a daily review? Is it an hourly review? And God help you if that's the case, right? Trust me, nobody wants that. And nobody on either side wants that, by the way. But coming up with something reasonable to determine how I can quantify my risk and understand how that's going to play into my organization compared to my relationship with you, what I can share with you, what we're going to do going forward. We're only really beginning. So let me step back. So AI has been used by the security space from really the get-go. We've used it. You're talking to one of the original firewall monkeys, right? I used to take and do all the log review and so on and so forth. Thank goodness that I don't do that anymore, right? I mean, we have automated scripts, we have AI that can go through way better than me after looking at it for 6 hours and determine variances and abnormalities that come through a firewall log. Then we can do something actionable with that. AI is only going to increase that capability. We're going to use AI to do interesting things that decrease the workload for the average security guy and do it in a way that makes their workload not nearly as brain damage. Brain damage, again, as you well know, being one of my favorite technical terms, right? Anything that I can take and reduce the brain damage of the average security guy is something that I'm interested in. The other part of it that's I know particularly interesting to you, Sarah, is that I've seen some organizations that are taking AI, especially like some of the chat GPT stuff, generating, let's take a hypothetical where you get a CVE. The CVE basically says, all this technical mumbo jumbo, you have to have a tinfoil hat to understand it, and 37 letters behind your name, and blah, 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 so on and so forth. And, again, only 1 in 10 CISSPs can even read it and get what it's actually being said. That chat GPT instance is then taking that, translating that into English, in a way that some normal person can actually understand it, and doing something with it that can then be sent to my executive team saying, here's this latest CVE, here's how it relates to our organization, and here's why we should or should not be concerned. That's a huge benefit, because our tinfoil hat brethren are not necessarily the greatest writers and greatest interacting people in the world. And having that tool to be able to express what's going on in the organization in a way that the business leaders can understand, non-technical business leaders can understand, that's a huge benefit. So a couple different examples of how AI is going to matter. There's things that I'm really excited about, that one in particular. There's things that, of course, the bad guys are using AI too, which is that's just the world that we live in. They're, of course, going to innovate in ways with AI that just make me want to shudder at night. But we're going to face them and we're going to beat them when it's all said and done. And then we'll start all over again.
Yeah, great comments. We had Fabian sent in a comment here. The vendor management risks are particularly concerning. Our clients onboard so many vendors, we conduct an initial assessment and later assessments are on a yearly basis, as needed, which, I don't know if you want to comment on that. I know that both Process Unity and CyberGRX have continuous monitoring and will alert you if there's been a significant change in between the assessment time, so you can dig in and evaluate further. But do you want to comment on Fabian's comment here?
I'm happy to. Yeah, I'm happy to. I mean, it's a constant problem, right? And so your vendor space is one that, unfortunately, you really should be constantly reevaluating. I mean, not because I want you to get rid of vendors, but your vendor profile is changing just as often as your profile is changing. And so when you multiply that literally by the number of vendors that they have, then by the number of vendors that they have that might have access to your information, so on and so forth, you can see how the snowballs like this just, almost instantly. So you do need to take and be aware of that. You do need to be taking and doing assessments on a fairly regular basis. Is once a year enough? Quite bluntly, I don't really think it is. I think that you need to have some kind of assessment on at least a quarterly basis, depending on the critical nature of the vendor, depending on what kind of information that they're getting. You may find that you need to have it even more often than that. Not only because it's not a matter of trust. It is literally a matter of they represent a significant risk to your organization. The customers that you deal with expect your information, your data, their information to be secured. That information is being shared with that third party, and that you need to be accountable and they need to be accountable to make certain that information is secured. I don't think that's particularly unreasonable. Does that mean that you go into their offices once a month and tear up their offices looking for information? It doesn't. I don't think that you need to be very combative about it, but I think it's reasonable to expect that on a quasi regular basis that everybody kind of gather around the campfire and understand what is actually going on, what risks have been introduced. Can we isolate those? Do we have compensating controls around that risk? And then kind of go from there. So Fabian, the best answer is that you're doing it once a year. I'm glad you're doing it once a year, because quite bluntly, there's a lot of companies that aren't doing it at all, which is yet another whole story. But the more often, you should consider doing it more often, depending on the amount of risk that they have and the kind of data that you're sharing back and forth.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's all about knowing the relationship with your third party and how they interact with your company. But we have a stat at CyberGRX that we throw around quite a bit, that 20% of your vendors are critical risk, and you know which ones they are.
Yeah.
And if you don't know, then we will be happy to show you.
Yeah.
But those are the
it's the worst part is not knowing, right? I mean, it's not, if I know that you're going to be in a car accident tomorrow, heaven forbid, then you get all the insurance that you can on your car, all the medical insurance that you can, and you're good to go, right? I mean, or ideally, you just don't be in an accident, but that's why you do that. It's the ones that you don't know that come back to get you, okay? And so if you're dealing with somebody that you think is great, but all of a sudden they have a huge breach and you don't know about it, that directly impacts you. And so are you going to be aware of it enough to know whether they're in a breach? Are they going to disclose it to you? Do they have an interest to disclose it to you? Sometimes your contract says if you have a breach, you need to tell us. How forthcoming do people really want to be on the 9 o'clock news saying, hey, over here, we had a huge breach today. Everybody right here. Yeah, us. Yeah. Nobody wants to do that, right? Of course. So I mean, having that constant dialogue is important. But then also, as you mentioned, and I'm plugging you, but not plugging you, working with Process Unity and CyberGRX to gain those kind of constant insights, I think is critically important. I mean, I've been a fan of what CyberGRX has been doing for, I don't know, for forever. I mean, it's been, again, fundamentally, it's exactly the way that we should be going, from understanding how to deal with risk and how to deal with some of these bigger vendor due diligence and compliance related challenges that we all have. That's why I'm really excited to be able to do a lot of this research with you guys, because it makes a lot of sense. But all that independently, it still doesn't change the fact that you still got to take and get somehow, whether using CyberGRX, Process Unity, or Bob's House of Widgets, you got to figure out a way to get a handle on this. And you almost never can do it alone unless you have, an extra 5,000 people in your security division that don't have enough to do with themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about finding that risk needle in your third-party haystack.
That's right.
How we summarize it. Yeah, absolutely. So we're almost out of time, but I've got one final question for you.
Sure.
I have to ask, given the pandemic, the hybrid work environments, digital transformation, all the cyber attacks, it's a significantly more complex risk landscape than it was a year ago, 2 years ago. It's changing all the time. So I have to ask you, are organizations getting better at managing risk? Give us some encouraging words to close out our time here.
I think the short answer is I think yes. I think that with some of the changes that we've seen over the last few years, with better integration into the organization as at large, I think that we just naturally are getting a better understanding of what the risks are, how to best manage those risks, and how to take and provide for projects to deal with those risks going forward. Does it mean that we solve everything? No, it doesn't. But there are enough tools out there and enough maturity in those tools that now you can actually go out and find a tool like the ones offered by Process Unity and CyberGRX to help you with that process. When I was a CISO, that literally didn't exist. So Yes, I think we're getting there. Do we have a ways to go? Yes, we do. But when I think of third-party risk management, I'm really, really happy to know that the tools out there to make some of those dreams a reality exist in a way that I can actually afford and actually implement within my organization.
That's great. A great way to end our time today, Chris. Thank you. So yes, absolutely. Having the right tools, leveraging AI and automation, that's going to be the key to improving your risk management effectiveness and efficiency. We do have a closing survey as you exit out of this webcast. And if you'd like to see a demo of CyberGRX and Process Unity and how we can do exactly that, automate your TPRM program, we welcome the opportunity to show you what can be done, as well as show you who your riskiest vendors are, so you're not surprised or hearing about a breach on the news. So feel free to check that box. We will follow up with you. But otherwise, I want to thank you all for joining us today. Chris, thank you for sitting in with me, and it was a wonderful discussion. But our time is up, so I bid you all adieu. But thank you very much, and have a wonderful day.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.